The afternoon sun cast long shadows over a small park in downtown Cincinnati. JD Vance, the U.S. Senator from Ohio, was walking briskly down the sidewalk, fresh from a town hall meeting. His aides trailed behind, their phones buzzing with messages. Near a bus stop, a gaunt man in a tattered jacket stood up from a bench. His face was lined with hardship, his beard unkempt, and his hands calloused from years of living rough. As Vance approached, the man hesitated before stepping forward. "Sir," the man said, his voice raspy but polite. "Could you spare $3? Just need to get something to eat." For a moment, the senator stopped in his tracks. His aides exchanged quick glances, unsure of what was about to happen. Then Vance did something that no one expected. JD Vance looked at the homeless man for a long moment. The usual political response would have been to hand over a few dollars, say something sympathetic, and move on. But Vance wasn't reaching for his wallet. Instead, he asked, "What's your name?" The man blinked, surprised. Most people either ignored him or handed him change without a second thought. It's Mike," he muttered. Vance nodded. "Mike, tell me something, how'd you end up here?" Mike hesitated. He glanced at Vance's aides, then down at his worn-out sneakers. "Lost my job, got evicted. One bad thing after another, you know." Vance crossed his arms. "You ever serve in the military?" Mike shook his head. "No, sir." For a brief second, it seemed like Vance was about to walk away. His expression hardened, like he had just made a decision. But instead of turning his back, he said something that left everyone speechless. JD Vance took a step closer to Mike, his gaze sharp and unwavering. His aides, expecting him to brush the man off or hand him a few dollars, were caught completely off guard by what he said next. "I won't give you $3, Mike." Mike's shoulders slumped. He had heard that line before. Another politician, another rejection. "But I'll give you a job." The words hit like a lightning bolt. Mike's head snapped up, his eyes narrowing in disbelief. "A job?" Vance nodded. "I'll make a call. There's a guy I know, runs a construction business. He needs workers. You show up, you work hard, you start earning real money, no more begging." One of Vance's aides whispered something, but the senator ignored him. Mike opened his mouth, then closed it again. He had expected pity, maybe a few dollars to get by. But a chance? A real shot at getting back on his feet? That wasn't what he was used to. Still, there was a catch, one that would test Mike in a way he never expected. Mike stared at JD Vance, his mind racing. A job offer? It sounded too good to be true. He'd heard promises before, empty words from politicians, from charities that never followed through. But something about Vance's tone was different. Still, doubt crept in. "You serious?" he asked, narrowing his eyes. Vance didn't flinch. "Dead serious. But it's not just a handout, Mike. You show up sober, you show up on time, and you put in the work. No excuses." Mike swallowed hard. Sober. That was the catch. He shifted uncomfortably, rubbing his arms. He wasn't a hardcore addict, but alcohol had been his crutch for years. Could he really just drop it? One of Vance's aides leaned in. "Sir, we have to get going," Vance ignored him. "I'll make the call right now." "You in or out?" Mike hesitated. His fingers twitched like they wanted to reach for a bottle that wasn't there. The easy choice was to take the $3 and disappear. But deep down, he knew, this was his last shot at something real. He took a shaky breath. "I'm in." Vance pulled out his phone. And just like that, Mike's life changed forever. JD Vance stepped away from his aides and made the call. Mike watched, still unsure if this was actually happening. He had expected a politician's usual brush-off, not a personal phone call setting him up with work. "Yeah, I've got a guy here looking for a fresh start," Vance said into the phone. "Can you get him on a crew tomorrow?" Mike swallowed hard. "Tomorrow?" That was fast. Vance nodded as he listened, then turned back to Mike. "You start at 6 a.m. No drinking. No showing up late. You're serious about this?" Mike hesitated. The old life was calling, one more drink, one more night on the street. But deep down, he knew, if he said no now, he'd never get another chance like this. He clenched his fists. "I'll be there." Vance gave him the address of a shelter where he could stay the night. "Go there. Get some rest. Show up tomorrow ready to work." Mike nodded, gripping the paper with the address like it was a lifeline. As Vance turned to leave, Mike called after him. "Why are you doing this?" Vance paused. Then he looked back and said something that stunned Mike to his core. "Because someone once gave me a shot, too." And with that, JD Vance walked away, leaving behind not just a politician's promise, but a real chance at redemption. The early morning sun peeked over the skyline of Cincinnati, casting long shadows on a construction site buzzing with activity. Workers in hard hats moved with purpose, the sound of drills and hammers filling the air. Among them was Mike. His beard was trimmed, his clothes no longer ragged, and his face, though still lined with hardship, had a new determination. He wiped sweat from his brow and took a deep breath. 6 months. 6 months since that day in the park. 6 months since JD Vance had given him a choice, stay lost or fight back. And he had fought. The first few weeks had been brutal. Waking up at 5 a.m., forcing himself to stay sober, proving he could show up and work hard. The foreman, the one Vance had called that day, had been tough but fair. "You screw up, you're out," he had warned. But Mike hadn't screwed up. He had kept his head down, worked harder than he ever had before, and little by little, his life started to rebuild itself. He saved his first paycheck. Then another. Then another. After 2 months, he moved out of the shelter and into a small rented room. No more begging. No more streets. And now, 6 months later, he was still standing. That afternoon, during his break, he pulled out his phone, the same cheap flip phone the shelter had helped him get. He scrolled through his contacts and found a name he never thought he'd have saved. JD Vance. He hesitated. Would the senator even remember him? Did it even matter? After a deep breath, he typed out a simple message, 6 months sober. Still working. Thank you. He hit send. A few minutes later, his phone buzzed. He looked down and saw a reply. Proud of you. Keep going. Mike smiled. Then, as the foreman called the workers back, he stood up, put his hard hat back on, and got back to work, no longer homeless, no longer lost, but a man rebuilding his life. A year had passed since the day Mike asked JD Vance for $3. It was a cold autumn afternoon, and Mike found himself back in the very same park where everything had changed. This time, he wasn't sitting on a bench with an empty stomach and nowhere to go. He was wearing a clean work jacket, his boots worn from labor, but sturdy. He had just finished another long day at the construction site. As he sipped a cup of coffee from a small diner nearby, he noticed a younger man sitting on the same bench where he himself had once slumped. The guy looked rough, torn hoodie, shaking hands, the unmistakable weight of hard times pressing down on him. Mike watched as a businessman in a suit passed by, the younger man muttering something in his direction. The businessman ignored him, walking faster. Mike sighed. He knew that feeling. After a moment of hesitation, he got up and walked over. You all right, man? Mike asked. The young man looked up, surprised that anyone had even acknowledged him. Just trying to get a couple bucks for food, he mumbled. Mike took a deep breath, remembering the words that had been said to him a year ago. Then, with a small smile, he said, "I won't give you $3, but I'll give you a job." The young man blinked, caught off guard. Mike reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. "I know a guy." Mike sat across from the young man in the diner, the smell of fresh coffee and fried eggs filling the air. He had bought the guy a meal, not a handout, but a start. The kid, who introduced himself as Ricky, tore into his food like he hadn't eaten in days. Maybe he hadn't. Mike knew that hunger well. "So, you serious about work?" Mike asked, watching him closely. Ricky paused mid-bite. He glanced up, skeptical. "I mean, I dunno, man. Ain't worked in a while." Mike leaned back. "Yeah. Neither had I, till someone gave me a shot." Ricky smirked, shaking his head. "And now you're, what, a success story?" Mike chuckled. "Nah. Just a guy who stopped making excuses." Ricky stared at his plate, silent. Then, after a moment, he reached into his pocket. Mike tensed. Old instincts told him to be ready for anything. A weapon? A trick? A grab for his wallet? But instead, Ricky pulled out a crumpled bottle cap. He set it on the table, rolling it between his fingers. "I ain't gonna lie to you," he muttered. "I got a problem. Booze. Pills, sometimes. I wanna work, but I ain't sure I can, keep it together." Mike exhaled. This was it. The real test. He tapped a finger on the table. "Listen, Ricky. You want out of this life? You gotta want it more than the next drink. More than the high. It's work, man. Hard work." Ricky's jaw tightened. He looked down at the bottle cap, then back at Mike. "You really think I got a chance?" Mike nodded. "Yeah. But only if you take it." Silence stretched between them. Then, in a slow, deliberate motion, Ricky picked up the bottle cap, and tossed it into the trash. "All right," he said. "Let's see if I can do this." Mike grinned, pulled out his phone, and made the call. Another shot. Another chance. The cycle wasn't just repeating, this time, it was growing. 6 months later, Mike stood outside the same construction site where he had rebuilt his life. But this time, he wasn't the new guy. He was the one bringing in someone else. A truck pulled up, and Ricky stepped out. His hair was trimmed, his face was cleaner, and his eyes, though still carrying the weight of his past, were sharper, more focused. He had made it through the first 6 months. Barely. It hadn't been easy. There were nights when Ricky almost quit, when the withdrawal got bad, when the old life whispered in his ear. But every time, Mike was there. A call, a check-in, a reminder of the deal they had made. First day on a new crew. "You ready?" Mike asked, arms crossed. Ricky smirked. "Hell no." Mike laughed and clapped a hand on his shoulder. "That means you're doing it right." The foreman called for them to get moving, and as Ricky walked onto the site, Mike watched him go, pride swelling in his chest. Then his phone buzzed. A message. It was from JD Vance. "Heard what you did for that kid. Proud of you, Mike. Keep the chain going." Mike smiled. He slipped his phone back into his pocket, took a deep breath, and walked onto the site, not as a man looking for a second chance anymore, but as a man giving them.